Welcome to Underdog Rising with your host, Wade Posehn, where we ignite your journey from humble beginnings to greatness through inspiring tales of top executives and entrepreneurs. Welcome, everybody, to Underdog Rising. Today, we have Kelly Cristiano with us. She is the co-founder and CEO of Revelocity Consulting. Kelly, thank you so much for spending your time with us today, and I'm just really excited to get into this episode with you.
Wade, I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you for having me.
I would love it if you could now shift into sharing sort of your underdog story and just walking through your journey from after college to where you are today, just so that the listeners can understand you better and have a walkthrough of your career journey.
Sure. My story is, I think, kind of interesting because it starts with the fact that I did not know what I wanted to do.
Interesting.
I was the first in my family to go to college. I worked through college. So I worked as a waitress and a bartender when I was in college, which I think was invaluable experience. It was a great way to maximize earnings while having flexible hours.
Mm,
And it taught me, I think, some key lessons. The more I worked and the harder I worked, the more money I made. Gave me some great customer service skills for sure. Also, the nicer you were to people and the more you learned to work well with people, again, you tended to make more money.
sure.
So it pushed my motivation. But even going through college and getting out of college, I still really didn't know what I wanted to do. I gave
Mm,
myself a year as I got out of college to kind of, I don't know, reset. I didn't get a real job right away. But in a year I started looking. And I came across Aramark Corporation, which was a very, very large company I had never
yeah.
heard of, but they had a large um, a big part of their business was kind of hospitality. They ran managed services. They're still around. I shouldn't say ran. They run managed services at like food services at colleges and
Mm,
universities, business locations, hospitals, et cetera. They have some other businesses too. But I saw a job in the college campus division in food service and thought, well, it's kind of interesting. I have this hospitality experience, and so maybe that, kind of gives me some connection. And at the same time, I thought very deliberately, like this is a really large international company, and so,
mm,
maybe it will give me the opportunity to do other things to start my career. And that became a little bit of a theme. It was um, interesting. I thought this early on, but it did become a theme in my career. It comes up again, as you'll hear. So I start with Aramark in field operations, and sure enough, a couple of years in, I get the opportunity to move to Philadelphia and go into information technology.
wow.
Traveled around the company doing point of sale installations, implementation. I ended up building out a team that was remote based in the field because I had this field operations experience and the technology experience at that point. Then I ended up in product management, sponsored me to get my MBA, which was fantastic because I was kind of this rising star. But after 11 years, it was time to move on, and I got this opportunity. So they were a large company, 250,000 employees.
Mm,
I got this opportunity to go work for a startup and thought, okay, that'll be fun and interesting.
right.
The CEO was a serial entrepreneur. She was great. Um, it was this is in 2000. So here's an interesting twist. In 2000, this company we did home-based call center agents, high-end customer service. Back when nobody understood
Yeah.
that you could have people working from home answering calls and doing it was high end.
Mm,
We did kind of concierge services for
okay.
large companies like Citibank, OnStar, et cetera. And so we had to implement very cutting edge technology. Nowadays with especially when COVID hit, everybody was working from home. But this was very different back in
Yeah.
2000. And in fact, you had to sell people on the fact that it really worked. Um, and so we grew from, 30 employees to hundreds of employees. I was there for 7 years and a great experience because while I had had, multifunctional experience at Aramark, running this company and growing it and raising,
Mm.
and I had experience raising, it was venture capital backed, but raising money, M&A activity. We didn't sell while I was there, but we had a bunch of M&A activity. We almost sold.
Mm.
We made a choice not to at that point. Um, Selling to large clients, building out, a huge team and every functional area in a company because you have to. And when you're in a startup, as I'm sure many listeners will appreciate, you do everything and you hire
Mm.
people who are able to kind of flex and do everything, or else they don't make it in that kind of environment, frankly. Um, then I loved it, loved the people, built a great culture. But it's interesting, after 7 years, um, I got the right, I guess the right phone call on the right day from an executive search person. And it was a man I had met on an airplane 2 years prior.
No way.
Uh,
That
we had been kind of, it was a travel problem. We were sitting next to each other, kind of stuck on a delayed flight, struck up a conversation, exchanged business cards. And he called me and said, I just got this search in my firm, and I immediately thought of you because it was a perfect connection for your background. And I wasn't sure you'd still be there, but I'd love to talk to you about it. So that was You Promise, which was a Sally Mae company,
mm.
a small part of Sally. Sally Mae was an enormous company. You Promise was a relatively small part of it, but still a pretty big business. And so, I took the call, I talked with him. It was intriguing for a bunch of reasons. And one of which was it was Boston based. I lived in Boston throughout the previous companies, but I did a lot of commuting. I relocated once, but I did a lot of commuting. And, this was a Boston based company. My dad was ill at the time, and it just was kind of the right fit. And it allowed me to leverage a lot of my experience. Now, um, I did make what was not an easy decision because I was running
Mm.
the company at VIP desk. This job, this job with You Promise, was to be part of the executive team. I wasn't going to be
Mm.
running the company
Mm.
within the Sally Mae organization. I was going to be part of the team driving revenue. And so while it was a larger company, I had significant responsibility, and the
Mhm.
compensation, compensation is important to most of us.
Mhm.
Compensation was competitive. It was a pivotal career decision point. But I decided to go, and again, part of the reason, I had some personal reasons, as I mentioned,
Mhm.
but part of the reason was because um, I thought Sally Mae was a large company, and I again thought, well, this could be interesting. It was a public company. This could be interesting because I could do some other things potentially. I could go into the You Promise part of the company and maybe do other things. It turned out to be a very, very good decision for
Mm.
me because in a couple of
Nice.
years, I was given the opportunity to work on the Sally Mae part of the business and literally build out a brand new online banking business. A new senior executive had come in on the Sally Mae side and saw my background, tapped me on the shoulder, pulled me out of the You Promise business, and said, we have a bank charter and we want to build an online banking business, and I'd like you to do it, and I'd like you to launch it in 7 months. And I had no banking experience, and sometimes it's good to not know what you don't know. And I
Mhm.
said, sure. And so assembled a team, like kind of a cross-functional team, immediately went to start hiring a couple of people who had real banking experience, online
Mm.
banking experience. And we did launch. We launched in the 7 months. And a
Incredible.
fantastic experience of being able to meet people quickly, pull people together, uh, you know, launch an entirely new design, launch an entirely new product, et cetera,
Mm.
and just loved it. Loved the energy of it. and got to know people and got visibility very quickly at the highest levels of the Sallie Mae parent organization. And from there, I went on to run I turned around a payments business and sold it at a premium. I ended up ultimately, Sallie Mae is known on their primary businesses as a student lending
Right.
company. And so I ended up on the product and sales side, running
Mm.
the revenue side of that business, the sales and revenue side, which is a multi-billion-dollar business, and and did that for years, growing market share, even though it's the largest provider in the industry. And so I had a great career there. It's a fantastic place to be. I had tons of opportunity, and so that
Mhm.
decision to make what some people would have thought was a tough move, from running the show at a smaller company at VIP desk to becoming part of a senior team, turned out to be, the one of the best decisions I could have made.
But a scary one in that moment, do I stay or do I go? Yeah.
Yeah, especially I shed some tears leaving VIP
Oh.
desk. I loved the
Mm.
people. I was proud of what we had built. I loved the founder who I worked with. And so there were so many, feelings. It wasn't just a career decision. It was a personal decision. It was tough personally, but it just felt like it was time to go. And I had, you
Mm.
know, um, and it was good for my family, and I felt like it would be over time because this was a large public company that had a lot
Right.
of upside too. um, so then I left Sallie Mae in late 2019, which I think people can see what was coming there,
Yeah.
even though I couldn't. I thought none of us could, right? Now we
No,
can.
yeah. Yeah.
um, and I thought, for sure, I mean, I would go to my next corporate role in some period of time, and I had already started talking to some folks in relevant places, mostly in financial services. I thought I'd go to the next big corporate role, even though I had enjoyed time in both large companies and a small company.
Mm.
And I got, by chance, I got a consultant. Somebody contacted me about coming in and doing some consulting for a project, and I thought, well, this would be great to do, and while I'm looking for my next job.
Mm.
And and I was doing that when COVID hit in March of
Oh.
2020. And so the project, which probably would have been extended otherwise, and my job search would have continued otherwise,
Mhm.
project got wrapped up. We all ended up at home. It was May of 2020, and I thought,
Mm.
oh boy, now what? I didn't feel like I look back and I'm not sure I was right about this decision, because I didn't feel like that was going to be a good time to continue looking for a new senior role in a company.
Right.
However, I thought, okay, well, I liked this one consulting gig that I did. Really liked it. I felt like I went in, I really made a difference. I'm very good not only at innovation and running, teams and companies, but at optimization, right? Seeing what's being done in a business
And then
and improving.
mhm.
So I thought, well, maybe I should give this consulting thing a try. Built a website, very basic, the first version, but got something up and running, made a list of all the contacts that I have had over the years. And some of these folks I hadn't had contact with in a long, long time. And
Mm.
I felt like, oh, I don't know if these folks are going to take a call, but let me make a master list. And sketched out, what do I think I can do
Mm.
for consulting, and then what's the short list of what I would prefer to do. And it all centered around sales and marketing, because even though I had a lot of operations experience, I felt that the sales and marketing piece was my core capability. I will say, and I'll try to be succinct about this. I would say my approach to making contacts was to reach out to the first group of contacts, asking them for what they thought, right? Asking their
Mm.
opinions, to say, hey, I, um, I'm going to do some consulting. Here's what I'm thinking. You know me. You're some people I've worked with before at different levels. Some people had worked for me. I had worked for some people, peers, and what do you think? And people gave me some real feedback. Some of them looked at my website, which, to say, and some people just said, like, look, I know you have to have a website, but if I'm working with consultants, like, I really want to hear what they do. I would really want to see in a PowerPoint, like some
Okay.
details around what they're going to do. And so it kind of confirmed the fact that at this point, my website wasn't going to be so important, so I could kind of leave it basic. Um, but the nice surprise was through these feedback conversations, I had a couple of folks who said, we could use some help with some things like what you're doing right now. Now, they weren't the exact things that I went out with. Everybody had a
Okay.
custom need, but
Mm,
that's okay. So the one of the learnings was, you can come up with your list of whatever, a dozen things that are like the exact things you're going to
mm,
do, and ultimately, and this continues to this day, ultimately everybody has this custom need. And so,
yeah.
so I learned some things like, and I thought about my time as an executive and thought, well, okay, from a pricing perspective, it's probably important to be able to, behind the scenes, price out what the client needs and give them a fixed price. So
Mm,
because I never liked open-ended pricing when I was the client buying services. So I had to figure out and come up with a methodology, and it's risky because if you're
yeah.
wrong, especially when you're starting out, if you're wrong, it's going to cost you money. But in the very beginning, you've got the time, and so it's gonna be some trial and error, and that's okay. But I mean, long story short, I got a couple of um, things very quickly. I
That's
got,
so great.
relatively quickly. And one was a project, a research project, and another was, as you asked me in the beginning, was a temporary fractional CMO role working for a fantastic company. And loved that, needed a lot of help, and they needed it quickly, and jumped in, and it was great. So over time, I've continued the business, and I work with some other folks who fill in needs when I get projects, and I fill in needs for them when they get projects. They kind of do what I do, but in different, like, complementary areas. And um, yeah, continue to love it. And so so I've had like these different experiences, big companies, small companies, a small one I grew, and I've loved it all.
That is absolutely exceptional. I love hearing from where you started to where you are today. And that journey has had its own elements of, ups and downs and challenges and twists and turns. But at every stage, you've seemed to overcome it with no matter what has been thrown at you. And that's why I love sort of doing the show is just that it ties into the underdog rising so poetically almost, because you in your day-to-day lives in those moments you might not think of that, right? But you are building those skills, making those choices, mentally adapting to break through certain roadblocks or bottlenecks, and you guys are just advancing in your careers. So you mentioned few points that I'd like to touch on and ask other questions. So regarding, like, you've worked for small companies and big companies, for young professionals or students listening today, what are your recommendations or thoughts around small company versus a big company? Like, are there pros and cons? Should they start out looking for a big company initially because there's room to grow, or should they start small? What's your perspective on that?
In a small company, you will have to learn a lot of different things and wear a lot of
Mm,
hats. And it's very fast paced, because it has to be. I
yeah.
really believe it doesn't matter what small company you go to work for.
Hmm.
It will be fast paced.
Okay.
You will undoubtedly work a lot of hours if you're going to make it, right? You may
Hmm.
start and decide, I don't want to do this, and then you leave because it's not a life sentence. But if you're going to make it, you're going to work a lot of hours at the same, and you're going to build relationships with people because you have to. You're all working, you're working
Yes.
towards the same goal. And from a pot, some of that might sound negative. It's not, it's realistic. It's exciting at the same time. You know exactly what you're working to. Well, let me pivot for a minute. I was going to say, you know exactly what you're working for. You do at times, but as a small company, when things aren't working, you pivot quickly. You say, okay, this isn't working. Let's go do this. Moving that ship can be pretty quick too, because again, it's small and it's a small group of people who are working
Mm,
together closely. So you want to think about that. Now, the larger company, you're going to start in a role that's somewhere in a functional area. So let's
mm.
pick finance. You
Okay.
graduated with accounting as, you know, in your background. So you're going to start an accounting organization, and it's going to be fairly siloed. Like you'll work with maybe with some people elsewhere in the organization in marketing or the business, because they'll feed numbers into you, and you know,
Mhm,
you get a little bit of interaction, but for the most part early on you're very functional. And so you'll get a lot of skills in that functional area, but not as much from other areas of the business. You'll also probably have a bit more of a predictable schedule. And if it's a big, you know, especially if it's a really big company, and you may or may not have interaction with people higher up in the organization,
mhm,
right? You may be in like town hall meetings and things like that, but you might not
mm,
have very much on a day to day basis. Now, over time, you know, there will be lots of postings probably for many other jobs that give you an opportunity to move up. And so that's all a good thing. And compensation levels can be pretty set. I didn't mention this, with a small company, they're not making numbers. There may not be any and they're not
mm,
growing by people. There
mhm,
may not be a lot of opportunity to, you may be working and excited, but there may not be a lot of opportunity to move up for some period of time.
mm,
So I think there are pros and cons to both, and each person has to think about their personality, what they want to do, but it's okay to try, right? If you think
yeah,
one environment or another suits you as you're coming out of college, then try that environment. Look for, you know, think about, what does the culture look like? Who am I going to be reporting to? Which is
mm,
extremely important. Are they going to be supportive? Are they going to help you learn? Because you can still learn it. You do learn in a corporate environment. And you know, just, I mean, I think, you know, make sure that that learning's going to be there. And then you assess. You stay there for a year or two. Do you want to stay? You're seeing the things you want,
mm.
and if not, it might be time to move on. Or even if you have, it still might be time to move on.
That actually leads into my next question so greatly. I just wanted to touch on small companies and, large companies in a different state of mind. Like, do you think it's important to stay at one company for a long period of time or to switch roles? Now, we might go into pros and cons again for
Yeah.
each, but you just have that experience, right, where you've had opportunities to switch or stay for a shorter period of time, but also have a long length of time that you've actually stayed with the company as well.
Yeah, I mean, I talked about different roles that I had
Mm,
within companies. So I did a lot
yes.
of things within companies, but to be clear, I was at Aramark 11 years. I was at Sally Mae for, I guess, also 11 or 12 years.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't worked for that many different companies. I just
Mm-hmm.
was within the large
Within roles,
companies,
yeah.
did a lot of different things within those companies, did different, you know, ran smaller businesses, built businesses, things like that. I know nowadays, because I, you know, have hired younger people, looked at resumes, et cetera, it is much less common for people to come in and have worked at the same company for so long. And I think we, you know, more seasoned managers just have to get used to that.
Mm,
Um, I will say, and again, this just may be more old school, when you look at many very senior leaders, they often at large companies, like especially
mm-hmm.
large public companies, they often worked their way up the organization, the
Mm,
same organization, maybe not their whole career, but for, you know, call it 20 years, you
mm-hmm.
know, they moved
Yeah.
around, they got experience, and they moved up. So it's something to contemplate. I just don't
Yeah.
know if we fast forward 20 years if we're going to see that same thing. So it's
Interesting.
hard to say. I don't think there's anything bad about getting experience, you know, outside one company, is if you're showing this pattern of learning, uh, and you're prepared to answer why. you've moved around a bit and you show a pattern of
Mm.
learning in different experiences. I think you have to be careful if all you're showing is I keep jumping for more money.
I think that's a really wonderful point that you touched on, right? And that's why I just want to kind of highlight that because I think sometimes in this day and age, you do tend to see that people will jump from role to role, and it's okay. You need to be cautious of that, and it's really prominent on social media as well. People advising to do that, but I think a lot of people don't do a good job at highlighting staying loyal and true to the company, but still advancing within your career, right? And growing yourself as well, obviously, as people want to do that. But you touched on a point from when you were at VIP desk and then you made the shift to sort of you promised Sally Mae. Um, and you kind of touched on this point of fear. Like, I don't want to say that you were scared. A decision just had to be made. And it was like, do I leave or do I stay? Would you mind just sort of touching on the fear part of it, as I think younger professionals and college graduates sometimes might have a fear on, like, what decision do I make? Were there any elements that like implemented or did to overcome that fear to make that transition?
Sure. First, I always believe you should speak with people in objective people in your circle. And I guess that starts with
Mm,
building a circle. We all logically
sure.
have people in our kind of close family and friend set, and
Yeah.
it's good to talk to those people. They may be a little some of them may be a little less objective. Sometimes you have people in your friend and family circle who are very objective, right? And are very candid with you. It depends. So, but you need to know who those people are. And then it's good to build a network. And a network can be just a couple few people um, of folks who you've either worked with before or who are in the professional world.
Mm,
They can even be peer level. It doesn't have to be super high level people, but who you can bring this opportunity to and share with them your thoughts of the pros and cons and your fears and concerns, and let them help talk you through their perspective and what they're hearing from you and feed it back and get their opinions as well. And that doesn't mean,
mm,
ultimately you have to make the decision, but you should have inputs from a whole bunch of people to make sure you're not missing something in your consideration, and try to get to the point where you're looking at it more objectively and helping you to take some of the emotion out of it. And I guess identifying the emotion, like it's okay to put a name on the emotion. You can't,
yes.
we're
Yes.
human, right? We
Exactly.
can't help it. And recognize, I mentioned, the situation with my dad. I mean,
Mm,
that was a very legitimate um, reason at that point in my
yeah.
life. And it was okay to put that in the decision
Yes.
process. I had to realize at the same time what some of the other risks were. Like if I had wanted
Hmm.
to go to a job outside the company in 2 years, I was going to have to answer, why'd you go from running a company to going over here and just being a part of this
Mm,
executive team, right? So that
yeah.
was something to contend with as I was deciding. So anyhow, that's a little bit of an aside, but I think this idea of making sure you're talking through it with other people who can give you some of their thoughts and tease out, your reasoning is
Mm.
probably the biggest help in the process.
I think that's very valuable that you mentioned that. It's often people will ignore or don't want to touch on the emotion of the feeling, but you have to realize that, acknowledge it, feel it, but then okay, how can I work past that to, identify what I need to actually do within my life? And you touched on mentorship. Like, how has mentorship played a role in your career over the years, and how do you approach mentoring others now if you do?
Yeah. I had two people, both women, who made a tremendous difference for me.
Mm.
One was the first boss I had for my first real job, who she was only a few years older than I was, but she was ahead of me, right, in the career journey, and just took me under her wing and showed me the ropes and gave me all the inside scoop of the company and the stakeholders and all that, and helped me navigate my way in and around, and was happy for me when I got promoted. And so
Nice.
there's a lot written about, women not supporting other women.
Mm,
And so I didn't feel that at all, coming into the workforce. Instead, I felt incredibly supported by another woman. And then there was another time in my career where, similarly, and it was when I was a little more advanced in my career, I worked for a woman who, similarly, I needed different things at that time, but similarly was extremely supportive, helped guide me to, what were the right things to learn next, shared with me her journey, again, gave me the inside scoop on the stakeholders we had at that point in time, and how to manage those stakeholders, and made a huge difference. And so I believe the thinking is that, when you look for mentors, they really shouldn't be, in your reporting line, the
mm.
people you report to. But this was how it worked out for me, and really changed, uh, was life impacting for me and career impacting. Now, switching gears to what I've done, in terms of mentoring, have participated in formal mentor programs, both at
Mm.
my undergraduate college as well as in a couple of workplaces. I also built out a brand new employee resource group for women at one of the places I worked at.
Wonderful.
And I think and it was very impactful. And then I'd also say, as a woman who was climbing the ladder through some of my career and then achieved a level of success, um, I was very often asked to either speak in certain meetings, or one on one. I got people reached out to me a lot one on one, and young women, because I was in male dominated at the
Mhm.
senior levels industries.
Mhm.
And I always took those meetings. And so while they didn't result in um, mentor relationships, I
Mhm.
look at them as kind of role model conversations, that I think were very helpful to people, and took time, but I think it was time well spent. And I learned from the conversations too. I
Mhm.
learned what, things that concerned people who were younger and new in their career.
True.
And they seemed to find it helpful to hear my story. I've always been very candid, but to hear my story, to hear, um, what I feel people should think about, what can be helpful. And so I think that falls into these kind of conversations, even if they don't lead to real mentorship,
Mhm.
still are important, and are important for people to think about as they are climbing the ranks.
Yeah, I think that it's wonderful that you can still be there as that resource, to give back to those that might have uncertainty. And just I think oftentimes people get nervous to even just reach out. So not having that roadblock or having someone say no is it gives them a sort of a sense of confidence in their career. Just, you might not see it, but I think it really does. And, if we look at and sort of switch the positioning, and if you were one of those younger individuals coming to you now asking, questions, what is one thing that you know now that you wished you could have known back then when starting your career?
It comes down to one word, which is networking. And it's funny because, not ha ha funny, I'm on a board, where lots of very senior executives participate in this organization as they're kind of transitioning, to
Yeah.
different places in their careers. And it's a common thing people talk about, because many of us get so focused and busy in our careers as we're climbing the
Hmm.
ladder. And even once we achieve a level of success, that we don't spend enough time networking. And then as you're making changes, you realize that I was starting Revelocity, my consulting business, right? And I realized, as I made my list of all these great
Sure.
people I had worked with and encountered over the years, and I'm like, boy, I haven't interacted with these people in forever. And now many people still took the phone call and were very
Yes.
kind and supportive, but that's not the point. First of all, I should have built a wider network. And secondly, I should have found ways to stay in touch with people. it's so important. Most jobs, well, the job search will be easier if you have, personal connections, or people can make
Mm,
connections for you, and you will get exposed to more opportunity if you have a better network. And networking, um, I think younger folks should realize, and I probably didn't realize this either, which is why I tell my younger self, it's
mm,
not just all about, you go to cocktail parties twice a week, right? And you meet
right.
people. There's all kinds of things. Like, you make sure
Yeah,
you do some deliberate things when you're at a company meeting where you already work. Instead of sitting with all your friends at, lunch, you make a point to spend 5 minutes introducing yourself to some other folks so they
very
know who
smart.
you are and what you do. Or, to our point around mentorship or role models, you take that leap and reach out to somebody now, once a quarter, to try to have a
Mm.
conversation, to get to know people. Um, and you do go to some conferences and some events, and that's another way to expand. But it can, networking can be a lot of things, and but it is just so important that that's the first thing I go to when I think about what I wish I had learned earlier in my career.
I think that's brilliant. I think often at times we forget to do follow up, and I think that that's really important is just to continue that and have those conversations and establish that relationship. It's not just then a transaction. You actually get to know people and connect with them on a more intimate level, which is important. So you've gone through so many hills and valleys throughout your journey. Has there been sort of one habit that has contributed to your success, whether, it's a task that you do on a day-to-day basis or it's a mental hack or that kind of thing?
Yeah, I would say I made a habit. Well, I had been a little bit of a night owl, or very early in life. I got into the habit of getting into the office when I was in an office, get into the office very early, start work early, usually 90 minutes ish before the office woke up and people came in. I just found like it got me into the right mindset. I got ahead of my day.
Mm,
And that way, by the time people were coming in and stopping in my
you were
office or my
just
meeting started, I was already in my groove. And it just made such a difference. So I'd start with that. I can never pick one. I can rarely pick
no,
one
that's
thing. So
great.
I can
Yeah,
give you a
that's fine.
second thing.
Please share more. Yeah.
The second thing was one kind of a super. This is going to sound basic, but I kind of have a superpower for planning. I'm always thinking ahead,
Amazing.
and I would make well, and I make lists to go along with the planning. I make This is my personal life too. I have lists on paper, electronically. I email myself lists, and I'm always looking ahead by weeks, not just days. And so it would make my direct reports head spin, um, even in my even in my family life. But I mean, again, the more you're looking ahead, the more
Hmm.
successful you're keeping up with your work, you're staying abreast of what's going on, and it does make a real difference all around. And I feel like it takes the stress off of me because I feel
Mm,
like I'm on
hmm.
top of things. Even if I have this massive list of what I have to do, and then you have a feeling of great accomplishment. You'll read this elsewhere too, so this is not my brilliance, but as you check things off, you feel this like great
Yes.
accomplishment, right? So that's the second thing I'd add.
You're talking about checking things off a list, and there is something mentally that does actually happen about seeing that achievement, even if it's something small, right? You start your mornings off, and you're like, I had a glass of water, I did like a morning stretch, like I made my bed, like even those smaller, little, minute choices, it will set the trajectory for your day, and you want to keep accomplishing things. So I like that you really touched on that. One thing I'd like to touch on is you really dreamed big throughout your career too, and you really pushed yourself to get to the next level. So, like, if for a listener today, if they want to be a C
Mm.
level executive someday and that's their path, like, what should
Mm.
they be doing now to get there?
Yeah, I think for one, you need to think about getting different experiences.
Mm.
So, over a period of time. I mean, no one
Right,
becomes
right.
a C-suite executive overnight,
Yes.
but getting experience in different functional areas over time, I think is extremely important, including P&L experience, which I think you'll hear from anyone. And you sometimes have to do one of the things I mentioned that I did, which is take what may be considered lateral moves. Don't be tied
Mm.
up in titles. Um, Even money sometime, usually within a big company at least, if you take a lateral move, there might still be a little bit of money,
Mm.
that's given. But your title may be lateral. People may wonder why you're doing this. But if it allows you to move from finance to marketing, marketing to operations, whatever, as you get that experience across the company, senior executives are going to consider you much more
Mm.
valuable to the
Mm.
organization. And you will, not every move's going to be lateral, but it's just that
Yeah.
occasionally to get that job in a very different area of the company, you might have to consider what will look like a lateral move. But the people at the top will understand why you did it internally. And even if you jump to a different company, you'll have this like breadth of experience. So I think that's one thing. Then the other thing I recommend to people all the time, and I have told this to people who worked for me about people who worked for them who wanted to get promoted.
Mm.
I think doing side by sides with senior executives for those who want to move up is extremely important, because many times people will think they want to move up to those C-suite levels because they look and they think, well, those people are in charge, they drive the strategy, they make a lot of money, they all these great things. And they don't really understand what people do at that level
Mm.
and
Mhm.
the pressure and responsibility. So I have had people in jobs who have sat with me side by side for most of the day. Occasionally there's something
Mm.
super confidential they can't sit in on, but for the most part, and one experience stands out. I had a direct report who was a pretty senior person themselves, but the next level down, who wanted to sit side by side with me. And it was a day where I had 30-minute meetings back to back. And those were always the worst days because you're back and forth, all people in and out. And started first thing in the morning, and by about 10:30 the person was like, oh my gosh, like, how do you do this? The subject matters are extremely, you don't get a break. I mean, my assistant would just load me up with water and coffee because I couldn't leave my office. And so, but I was, you get used to this, and that's what you had,
Mm.
that's the pace you have to keep up in the
Mm.
mental, both preparedness before the day starts, as well as the mental persistence that you need.
Yeah.
And so I just think that's another thing that's important, is for people to really make sure they understand the rung that they're going for. um,
Mm.
and then one final very kind of tactical thing, I do think it's important for people to learn how to speak in front of a large audience, because they're going to have to build consensus and sometimes manage crises and things like that.
Yeah, I think that is true. I think there's a lot of skills and a lot of fear that can be pushed away when people get comfortable talking to other folks, especially not necessarily just one on one, but also in a large scale environment. So, sort of a little fun question I want to run by you, and I'll run by every guest that comes on the show is, at any given moment in time, how many tabs do you have open on your computer or your screen?
Oh, well, it's got to be a dozen, and it's worse than that on my phone. I'm just bad about closing things. It's not even
Right.
even my meeting. I open up my calendar and click on a
Yeah.
meeting, and then at the end of the day or the next day, I'll notice that I've got five of them still open from yesterday. And if I have to suddenly work heads down on a couple of documents, that's when I notice, because I'm going back and forth to either look
Hmm.
something up or work in a spread, and then I'll be like, there's too many things open. I have to close some of this.
Thank you for sharing that. It's interesting to hear all the varying different results, but I think it tends to sort of follow the same path, right? Like we open up so many things because there's certain tasks that we got to do, and then we shift to a different task, and then you close them out, and you just kind of get through that management. But it's always a fun, interesting question to ask. And then, are there any apps or plugins or software that you currently use that are optimizing or making your life a little bit easier?
Yeah, I think one of the things that is very helpful is Calendly because it
Mm,
allows people to set up meetings on your calendars without a lot of going back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And I think there are some other options just like that. So I find, other people use it. I've used it. And that's one of the tools that I think is kind of very fundamental, but helpful. And then I mean, this isn't work related, but we've got a very smart home with
mm,
all kinds of everything from opening your garage door to regulating temperature to checking to make sure you don't have a water leak. And so the reason why I go to the personal is we have all these things in part because it takes time. It makes things easier in life, and I have found this
mm.
throughout my career. The easier you keep things in life, the more focused you can stay with work.
Brilliant. That's amazing. I agree. I think simplifying the process can be really beneficial. Like even in my office, I actually have sort of things set up on smart plugs and all that. So at a certain time, even before I walk in my office, the lights kick on and everything. The environment is set so that when you walk in, it's like, okay, this is my environment. Let's sit down. Let's get ready to go. But yeah, even having those all throughout the house and just in your day to day life, it definitely helps. And yeah, scheduling calendar tools like Calendly is phenomenal too. I did want to jump into a question just for listeners with their first job choice. You touched on this a little bit earlier, but what what should one look for in their first job to kickstart their career?
You've got to be very in tune, and there are places you can go now, right, online that give where former or current employees give feedback on
Mm,
companies. I think going to work someplace that has a reputation as a positive culture is important in your first job, um, and so that you kind of start on the right foot. And then you want to be able to learn. So asking
mm,
questions about how you'll learn, even as I described in a big corporate environment, you probably kind of siloed when you start your career, but
mm,
you still want to know that you're going to be able to learn. There's some time for learning. Maybe there's some access to tools for learning. Maybe they have programs for rising stars. It doesn't mean you're going to get in it right away, but what
mm,
kinds of programs do they have? So you know that there's this investment in learning for employees. I think that's important. And then I'll go back to this again, but the person you're going to report to, being, somebody that you can relate to, who's going to spend time with you, have one-on-ones, give you feedback, be
mm.
candid, professional, but candid.
Yes.
You
Yeah.
need that feedback. I mean, I think we all need that feedback at
Hmm.
every level, but especially when you're starting off because there's so much you don't know and have to navigate. So those are
Hmm.
the things I'd really be thinking about.
Yeah, I agree with you because I think sometimes when we go into interviews or, when you're, especially when you're starting out young in your career, people always feel like they have to go and impress, which, rightfully so. I mean, you are applying for that position, but at the same time, it takes two to tango, and they should also understand that they are interviewing those individuals to see if they fit within their beliefs or core values, etc. So like you were talking about your direct report, and definitely see if you can speak to that individual and see how that relationship goes and see if it'd be a good fit for both parties. But there's a lot of ways to keep up with things these days and stay on top of learnings, and continuous learning is always important. So for listeners today, what is one resource that you go to for learning new things?
I really like e-letters that organizations put out there that summarize kind of news and tools And so, a particular favorite is the Morning Brew series. I mean,
Yeah, I know exactly what you're
I read
talking
Morning
about.
Brew before I get out of bed, and then they have other
Yeah.
series like Marketing Brew and the Technology one, et
Yes.
cetera, because I feel like not only is it a little, funny the way they put
Right.
things,
Yeah.
but it's a good summary of some top topics. There's always a section on some of the, tools and trends. So it's bite sized, and there's click throughs to things if very relevant things if you want to learn a little bit more. And I have a few others like that, Axios and some others, industry specific things, American Banker. And so those are the things that I, tend to
Hmm.
rely on. And then I like books, and I always look for recommendations from people. I read not that long ago 20-minute networking, and I've now given the book
Mm.
to everybody, especially people, my stepson, stepdaughter, my niece, people who are earlier in their career,
Yeah.
because even if you're more experienced in your career, it's a very practical guide as to how to prepare and execute a networking meeting in 20 minutes. And I was like, wow, this is so, like, it's so practical. And so I just loved it. So I'm looking, I'm always on the lookout for books as well.
Networking is definitely a key element to everything and success in life. It's building that relationships. People do business with people they trust, etc. I mean, you can cut and slice it any way you want, right? And I think that that's a really great book recommendation. I've never read it myself, so I'm going to jump into that and read it too, because it's even this day and age, things happen with so much speed that it's interesting to take that perspective, but then also, make sure you have that follow up and you're not just making connections. Cause I think, a lot of people dive onto LinkedIn, make all these connections, but then they never talk to the people. And it's like, that's
Right.
not how relationships go. But no, I really appreciate you sharing all of your knowledge, all of your expertise. This has been a phenomenal conversation. So I'll just thank you so much for, spending time with us today and giving all of this knowledge back to the listeners.
Oh, well, thank you, Wade. It's been my distinct pleasure to spend time with you and your listeners, and share my story, and hope that, people can find some nuggets here or there that's helpful to them. And thanks again.
Just for the listeners, if they wanted to reach out and connect with you just because you delivered so much value today, like where are a few places that they could connect with you?
Can absolutely find me on LinkedIn, Kelly
Perfect.
Cristiano. And then my website is www.gorevelocity, but you can also
I
link, it's on LinkedIn as well, so you can find me there.